All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. I will begin my screen share. We are the Indiana County Sustainable Economic Development Task Force. My name is Molly Sarver. I'm the Senior Land Use Planner at Indiana County Office of Planning and Development. I act as the Sustainability Coordinator to the task force. If you want to learn more about us, you can visit our website, sustainableindianacounty.org. We do list a schedule of our webinars on there. As our series draws to a close, we are beginning to upload the recordings of our webinars on our page, so you can find older webinars on there. You can also find those webinars recorded as live streamed on our Facebook page at ICSED Task Force. You can also type in Indiana County Sustainable Economic Development Task Force to find us on Facebook. If you have any questions and you'd like more information about our webinar series or our activities, you can contact us at sustainableindianacounty@gmail.com, and we will try to respond to you as quickly as possible. Before we begin our webinar today, I would like to draw attention to our webinar that we'll be holding next week, which is kind of a continuation of this workforce investment discussion, and that will focus on the organization Coalfield Development. They've been working to invest in Appalachian communities for the past 10 years, and they do some really good work in helping communities that are in economic transition. So, we really encourage you to consider joining us next Thursday, April 8th at 12 p.m. to listen to Marilyn Wren talk about Coalfield Development. Without further ado, I will allow our panelists to introduce themselves. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. Begin with Aric.
Hello, my name's Aric Baker. I am employed at the Keystone Generating Facility in Chillicothe, Pennsylvania as a continuous emissions monitoring system technician, which is a long name for I help maintain the equipment that reports the emissions to the state and the government. I also serve as a business agent for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 459 out of Johnstown, where we represent all of the production and maintenance employees at the Keystone, Conemaugh, Homer City, Seward, and Shawville power plants, along with many other employees in other utilities, municipalities, and manufacturing facilities all throughout Western PA and New York, totaling nearly 1,700 members. Today, I'll be speaking of the negative impact that RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative proposal that Governor Wolf is proposing for Western Pennsylvania. I'll be speaking of the negative impacts of it.
All right, Shawn.
Yeah, hello, Marley. My name is Shawn Steffee. I'm a Boilermakers business agent out of Local 154 Pittsburgh. I am also the recording secretary for the South Central Building Trades, which also encompasses Indiana. The Boilermakers build and maintain coal and gas-fired power plants, paper mills, steel mills, refineries, and we are heavily industrial in the fossil fuel industry. And I also will be speaking on behalf of the negative impact that the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative will have along with my trade.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. You're muted. Okay.
Thanks. Hi, Molly. My name is Rachel Gleason. I am the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance. We represent Pennsylvania's bituminous coal operators in addition to the manufacturers and the service providers that support the mines. We have over 160 member companies in Pennsylvania that span about 22 different Pennsylvania counties. The industry contributes over $4 billion to Pennsylvania's economy annually. We are the third largest coal producing state, and we employ directly and indirectly about 17,000 jobs in the Commonwealth. Today, I will probably also be speaking on what Shawn and Aric will be covering. We can also speak specifically to the coal industry in Indiana County and the future of mining in Indiana and the businesses that support those mines.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
Hi, Molly. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I apologize. I'm having some computer difficulties, but I'm joining you by phone. So thank you so much for having me. I represent E2, or Environmental Entrepreneurs, which is a national nonprofit organization. I'm the Pennsylvania consultant located in Pittsburgh. And I also am the executive director of the Pennsylvania Solar Center. E2 is known for working on policies that are good for the environment, but also, and importantly, good for the economy. Pennsylvania Solar is working to lift up the benefits and opportunities in the solar and renewable energy industries. And I'll be talking about those and those policies, and also how RGGI is helpful in those capacities as well.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I just want to share with everybody, we do have a survey that will appear at the end of this webinar. If you weren't able to stick around for the whole webinar, please go to our website, sustainableindianacounty.org, and go to our summit page. There you'll find the survey. It lets us know if there's anything you think we should improve on. Additionally, at any point in the webinar, please feel free to either comment if you're watching a Facebook live stream. We will be watching our Facebook live stream and try to answer or address comments. Please leave something in the chat, or if you want to make sure your question is addressed, type it in the Q&A. That's the best way to make sure that we don't miss your question. But again, you can feel free to leave it in the chat, Q&A, or comment on Facebook. Without further ado, we'll begin our webinar. Aric, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So I'd like to explain how these generation facilities actually act as a pyramid of revenue. The demand for electricity would be at the top of this pyramid, and it's required to maintain life as we know it. The PJM interconnection is the coordinator of the wholesale electricity market, which effectively starts these pyramids. At the top of the pyramids are the electrical generation units, EGUs, as we like to call them, which produce the needed electricity in exchange for the revenue. On the next tier of the pyramid would be companies and the individuals who operate these EGUs. And for example, that would include power plant workers, coal miners, truck drivers, construction trade unions, as Shawn Steffee, train crews, power plant owners, coal companies, gas companies, machine shops, an unlimited number of suppliers, and multiple others that I'm probably not speaking of. So all these individuals and entities are required for the day-to-day operation of these EGUs, and they all receive and depend on part of the revenue from the top of the pyramid. The next tier of the pyramids expands exponentially. This is where all these receiving revenue from their work at or with the EGU return to their communities and purchase houses, cars, food, entertainment, thus supporting contractors, grocery stores, hardware stores, insurance companies, on and on. You can't calculate it. Also paying taxes along the way to keep public services and programs solvent, paying property taxes that support the public education system and local infrastructure. At the end of the day, the demand for electricity is expected to increase going forward, so the revenue at the top of the pyramids will remain. However, if PA continues down the road of taxing fossil fuel generators out of business, those pyramids of revenue will be established in other states within the PJM interconnection, due to the fact that those states do not participate in the RGGI program. I do not believe there would be an entity in this area, Indiana, Armstrong County, that's not negatively impacted one way or another from the loss of these giant pyramids of revenue. As you cannot walk down the street and not come up with a connection to them one way or another, whether it's direct or indirect. If you go to any of the local stores, and you mention these plants, they can name off people that they know works there or drives a truck for there. It's just, it's endless. So that's my spiel on what RGGI would do. It effectively would move these pyramids out of state. And the net gain as far as environmental would be negligible due to the fact that there's generators in other states that are less efficient than the ones in Pennsylvania that are not running now. And that's because they have a higher heat rate, which basically means they're not as efficient. So if the generators within PA no longer run, then these ones will come online and run more, which effectively creates more pollution per capita for the amount of electric they generate. That I'll pass to Shawn.
Thank you, Shawn. And thank you, Aric.
Okay, Aric, thanks. Like I said before, I'm with the Boilermakers, and I represent about 1,300 members. And a lot of my members live right in Indiana County, as I do. I'm a lifelong resident of Indiana County. And the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, will definitely be a job killer in our industry, and will relinquish us as a leader in exporting electricity in Pennsylvania. As Boilermakers, we have in Pittsburgh, we have 26 counties in Pennsylvania, 2 counties in West Virginia, and 2 in Ohio, which also West Virginia, Ohio have coal-fired power plants and natural gas plants, just like Indiana. The governor proposes to, eliminate these jobs and these plants, which, as Aric pointed out, that, are huge taxpayers into our public schools, which will negatively affect our school systems within Indiana County. But really, the bottom line that I would just say is I don't have anything against renewable solar and wind, but let's just face the facts and common sense. If you look at the grid during the last winter episode that we had when everybody was talking about Texas, what drove the PJM to give every one of us, provide everybody, even in Indiana County, electricity? It was coal and it was gas. Okay. At the time, solar could not, some days was not even producing a single megawatt. And wind was not blown, and it was only producing a small percentage. So the large percentage of the electricity was coming from a reliable base load coal and gas. Okay, so we're looking to eliminate this, our coal-fired power plants in Indiana and throughout Pennsylvania, and we're saying to, impact our CO2 emissions. So all that's going to do is move the lost generation into other states, which I have guys working in West Virginia, Ohio. And if anybody watches the weather, it comes right across West Virginia and Ohio into Western Pennsylvania. So we're really not, eliminating our CO2 emissions. The only thing we're going to be eliminating is our jobs. And the other thing is with the solar and wind, if it could maintain our grid and maintain our electricity for everybody, why would China not be doing it? They are the leader in manufacturing solar and wind. They are building coal-fired power plants as we speak. China, India, Japan, they are, and to, electrify and use electricity in their manufacturing sector in their countries. So for us to grow in Pennsylvania and bring manufacturing back, we need a reliable electricity base. And that's what our coal-fired power plants do, and our natural gas plants. So I think that solar and wind has a place, but I think that needs to be geographically and strategically placed throughout the country. And as we all know, Pennsylvania has winter conditions. So if we get 12 inches of snow, how are we going to, have solar electricity when we know it's covered and it's already been proven that, we couldn't come up with any kind of solar generation in the last episode, the winter we had here. So I think moving forward that we need to keep everybody at the table in energy, and I'm not against energy efficiency or moving forward with that. And the other thing is they want to train us in solar jobs. Well, the building trades unions have people that will build your wind, and they will also build your solar. That's why we have electricians, iron workers, carpenters, laborers. The Boilermakers, we work on boilers. We're high skilled welders. We weld high pressure tubes and industrial duct work. And I just can't move over to another job. And I've yet to hear of anybody not coming up with the manpower at a solar farm or a wind facility if they use union building trades. So let's get a reliable energy mix. Let's use what we can use on all fronts, and let's move forward, because Reggie's not the answer. And if Reggie was such a moneymaker and such a good investment, why would West Virginia and Ohio not move forward and join the regional greenhouse gas? And why would we want to join something in a multi-state pact here with other states that are all importers of electricity? We're an exporter. So now we're trying to eliminate our fossil fuel industry that creates electricity, and I don't understand the reason. We're going to become an importer. And every state that's an importer, their electricity prices are the highest in the country. You can just look up the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and you can see where the electricity prices are. We fall below the national average in Pennsylvania. So I think that it's a losing situation for us in great blue collar family sustaining jobs. And, I know you have another individual on here that's going to talk solar, but I've yet to see a solar technician job pay $40 an hour with a pension and annuity. And I just think that we've got ahead of ourselves. And I think that the big hand of government should, and one guy, and Governor Wolf, should not have the right to just eliminate our jobs. I believe it should go through legislation. And I think the will of the voters should be looked at. And this is what I think we're not moving forward with. And I think that moving forward, that we need to have our legislators and the voters of Pennsylvania decide if we join Reggie, not one individual, Governor Wolf. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Shawn and Aric, for covering those topics of how the workforces will be directly impacted, and a little bit about how our electricity market will be impacted. Rachel, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about what Shawn and Aric said, just because I think there's some important details that most folks don't understand. It's been really difficult to educate folks on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or what is known as RGGI, during a pandemic. Nobody's really paying attention to policy issues when everything's been about COVID for the past year. Nevertheless, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative is a consortium of states, primarily New England. It started in New England, and later New Jersey joined, and they left, and then they rejoined, and Maryland joined, and Delaware joined, and Virginia just joined. This past January, they became active in RGGI as well. But what it does is it essentially applies a tax on your CO2 emissions. So while those New England states have reduced their individual, within their state line, CO2 emissions by taxing their generation and henceforth closing their coal plants and not developing natural gas plants, they're also importing their electricity. So none of them are actually creating power. They're taking hydro from Canada. They have oil tankers from Russia parked off the coast of Massachusetts when they can't get natural gas supplies because New York State won't let us build a pipeline through to New England. So they don't actually, it's not really a genuine argument that they've reduced their CO2 because they're stealing it from other states. In fact, the Homer City generating station in Indiana County has transmission lines that go directly into New York State. So while New York State participates in RGGI and says they've reduced their CO2, the fact of the matter is, when it's really cold and they need energy, those transmission lines from Homer City are going into New York State. Same thing with Maryland. They don't produce enough energy to support what they consume. Who does support the energy or creates the energy are states that are not in those, that do not operate in the same, what is called a regional transmission organization as those New England states. So New York has its own RTO, New England ISO has its own RTO, and then Pennsylvania participates in a regional transmission organization that has nothing to do with those states. So we participate, we're a little piece, we're actually a big piece of the puzzle in what is called the PJM RTO. And that includes, as Shawn mentioned, West Virginia and Ohio and parts of Kentucky and parts of Michigan and North Carolina. and all these other states. And so what Pennsylvania does is we are a power producer. We produce so much energy and so much electricity that's exported to all of these other states within that puzzle of PJM. And those states use what Pennsylvania generates. So by the governor wanting to unilaterally, without approval of the General Assembly, which legally, you know, I'm not really certain that he even has that kind of authority at this point, but by wanting to tax our power generation, that is going to do nothing to actually reduce CO2. CO2 is not local. It does not stay within your state lines. And as Shawn had mentioned, there are a number of power plants in West Virginia and Ohio that also participate in that PJM puzzle that produce energy. West Virginia is 90% coal-fired generation, and right now exports 50% of its generation. That is only going to increase. West Virginia legislature, just this week, I think they introduced a bill to ensure and maintain that their coal-fired generation in the state remains relevant and active. Ohio, in the same frame, has an equal balance of coal-fired generation and natural gas generation right now, and is in the process of building, I don't know, 6, 7 natural gas plants are either permitted or in construction along the Pennsylvania border. Because in Ohio, we're not going to tax our generation, but in Pennsylvania, we will. So joining RGGI really makes no economical sense. In Indiana alone, and I'm going to throw Armstrong in this too, just because I forget which one it is. Is it Conemaugh? Aric, that's in Armstrong?
It's Keystone, right?
Keystone's in Armstrong. So Keystone's in Armstrong, but it's right across the street from Indiana. So the economic impact is certainly felt there. But between those 3 power plants, there's 660 direct jobs with $83 million in salary. Beyond the direct jobs, there are additional induced and indirect jobs. So the total impact in just Indiana County is $873 million annually. In Armstrong, it's $544 million annually. So the implications that RGGI will have on the Indiana County economy are extreme. I mean, the property taxes that are paid to some of the school districts will completely disappear when these plants shutter their doors. In addition to that, the employment and many of these people, I know, Shawn, you live in Indiana. Representing the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, we have a number of active mines in Indiana County. And while those mines won't be impacted, likely, which is something else I will talk about, you know, many of them have neighbors that work in these power plants or have kids that go to the Homer City school districts. So what is going to be felt across Indiana County's economy is going to be extreme. I will say that the state senator and the state representatives in Indiana County, Senator Pittman, Representative Struzzi, and newly elected Representative Smith, are very much on board with not letting RGGI go through. They realize the economic consequences, but more needs to be done. That said, you know, as I mentioned, Indiana County has a good amount of coal mining operations. We have over 15, I think, active operations. Some of those are refuse. There's some refuse, some surface mining operations, and some underground room and pillar operations. Now, from the coal industry's perspective, the plants in Indiana County receive a majority of their Pennsylvania coal from the southwestern corner of the state, which is the Pittsburgh 12 coal seam, and also home to the largest coal mining operation in North America, underground coal mining operation in North America. But in Indiana County, it is home to some very high quality metallurgical coal, which is used for more steelmaking processes. So going forward, the metallurgical coal mining operations in Indiana County will probably continue to flourish, especially if there's some kind of national infrastructure package. You know, you really can't build bridges and steel buildings without steel, and a lot of that coal goes to making a high quality steel that is made in the USA and is not imported from China, which Sharon, I know you're going to talk a little bit, and we've never met, and I have nothing against solar panels. We've always, argued for a diverse grid with different fuel sources. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the wind turbines and the solar panels that are built that come into the US come from China. And China really has a monopoly on the rare earth mineral development and many of the other components that are used to make not just solar panels, not just wind turbines, but our cell phones and our computers and everything that we rely on here in the US that we do not mine. So I think there needs to be some serious policy issues looked at going forward as far as, disclosing where things come from that we use. where the solar panels come from, where the wind turbines come from, what future mining operations in the United States would be necessary to support these industries when these products could be made in the USA and with US labor. Outside of that, the coal industry in Indiana County supports, I was looking at some numbers this morning. We are probably at about 1,500 indirect and direct jobs. So that would include your direct employees at the mines, and then your folks like the engineers and the welders and the hydrologists and the trucking companies and the rail companies that go through the county. And I'll stop there. I did see that there was a question in the Q&A box that I said I would answer, and that was, what global benefits are gained by closing coal-fired plants in Western PA when over 5,000 such plants are being projected worldwide? To answer that question, none. Just like with RGGI, there are no benefits to closing coal-fired generation when it will be created elsewhere. In addition to that, China last year, I think, installed, I believe it was 32, maybe 35 gigawatts, not megawatts, but gigawatts of new coal-fired generation just in China. So, and I can go down a deep rabbit hole with this, but the whole joining the Paris Accord really meant absolutely nothing when China is not held to the same standards as other countries. And I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions as this conversation moves forward.
All right, thank you guys. And thank you, Rachel, for sharing a little bit more information about RGGI and its impacts, not just at the local level, but at a more regional, national, and international level. We're going to change gears a little bit here, and we're going to talk to Sharon about the renewable energy and renewable energy sector and job opportunities that are available in the renewable energy sector and growth there. So it's kind of changing directions a little bit away from RGGI. But certainly, Sharon, if you have any comments on RGGI, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about RGGI as well. As I mentioned, E2 focuses on clean energy sector, so and their clean jobs reports. So pre-COVID, we knew that Pennsylvania had about 94,000 clean energy jobs. A large portion of those are in energy efficiency, with about 10,000 people working in the renewable field, with about 5,000 in the solar field sector in Pennsylvania. That's Pennsylvania, the 11th state leading in clean energy jobs. And we're just really getting started because just on the renewable energy sector, our goals in Pennsylvania are so low. We have a goal of 8% renewable energy by this May, actually. So it's a very small percentage of our electricity mix right now, but we still are creating thousands of jobs in this sector. I just want to touch on, the energy. Pennsylvania is an energy leader, has been in every single energy resource forever as our history here. And I do think that we have this opportunity to be leading in the clean energy sector as well. And that's where the energy world is going. It is we have built industries and the jobs that in Indiana County being really central to our industrial heritage in Pennsylvania and really important to that, our heritage and our economy here in Pennsylvania. And it's in addition, we are moving into a new energy sector around the world. And China is the leading solar, we talk about China, but they have more solar than any other country in the whole world. So, and so does Germany, which is very much smaller than our whole country. So this is an opportunity. We have already lost over 12 coal-fired plants in Pennsylvania, and that's not because of clean energy, it's because of natural gas. Natural gas had become much more economical to run. Now we're seeing that change in the nation. Solar and wind now has become cheaper, and now even solar is cheaper than natural gas and renewables. So that is the trend. So we need to prepare for what's coming. And that is happening regardless of RGGI or not. And that's not happening overnight. There's going to be time to make this transition. And so RGGI does preserve our nuclear energy, our nuclear power plants, which are becoming uneconomical too. Natural gas is outpacing them and will cause the shutdown of those. And we know because of RGGI, the the plant in Beaver County has been saved now because of the talk of Reggie. So those jobs will be preserved and also preserved for a longer amount of time. So this is happening regardless if we do Reggie or not. Reggie does present an opportunity for all the Reggie states that are in Virginia now, and PJM, as was mentioned, and Maryland, New Jersey. PJM is moving into this direction. The other piece on this, as far as exporting our energy, these other states surrounding us have renewable energy goals that are very aspirational. We're talking 50%, 75% renewable energy goals. So they're not going to want our dirty energy. They're going to want, their goals are to get to renewable energy. So this is the reality of where we are. And there are tens of thousands of jobs in this sector. For Reggie, the governor's does have a workforce transition fund and plan to do that. And there's an opportunity to diversify. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, northern Pennsylvania. Diversifying our employment opportunities is really important. So it's not, we don't want to just jump into one energy and go back and just rely on another energy. We want to diversify. And so here's the opportunity to do that. And we talked about manufacturing. We are in a position to manufacture in the clean energy economy probably better than any other state on the East Coast, because we are already manufacturing electrical components for the energy industry. A lot of these companies can retool, and now we have an opportunity to create supply chains and increase those supply chains in Pennsylvania. And we sit geographically in a really remarkable place for that supply chain up and down the East Coast and going out into the Midwest. So this is we're not just talking about people on a rooftop putting on solar panels. We're talking about jobs that all educational levels, from installing roof, but sales and engineering and attorneys, landmen that were working in the gas industry are now working in solar, in real estate. This is a huge opportunity that every state in the nation is starting to realize, and we do need to face the reality of this is where it's going, and we can actually lead on this in this economy. So I'll stop there for now.
All right, thank you so much, Sharon, for that. We'll now open the floor up to comments and chats. If anyone wants to further address the question that Rachel answered earlier, what global benefits are there in closing coal-fired plants? I think Rachel might have covered it a little bit more on, the coal side, but if Shawn or Aric want to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah,
or
Molly,
Sharon.
if I could I ask Sharon a question? Sharon, any of these manufacturing facilities that you're talking about that's producing solar and wind, are they 100% being ran by renewables, or are they tied into the grid also for reliable baseload electricity of fossil fuels?
Yeah, so that's something that we get asked a lot. So right now, as I mentioned, renewables are a very small percentages of our mix. So that is a diverse mix for nuclear, natural gas. It used to be coal was king, was more than 50%. It's now much lower, into the 20%. Nukes are around 30%. Natural gas will continue to grow in that sector. So we're not getting and we're not trying to say we should be at 100% renewable energy tomorrow. We have a grid that is diverse. It needs to be more diverse, and we need to get our grid up to speed so that it can be competitive, but also be in a place that is more economical, because we see where the prices of fuel sources are going. So that's not something that's happening overnight. We have a long time to plan and transition into this grid. We also have energy storage and battery storage coming on very strong. It's a rapidly growing industry. And so we will see that actually creating other opportunities in the renewable energy field as well.
Just one more question, Sharon, and I'm just asking, is there any households that have rooftop solar panels installed that have been completely able to leave the grid and they rely solely on battery and solar?
Absolutely. Yep. And that's actually the trend that's happening that we're seeing. And we actually don't want to see people what we call defect from the grid. We do think being tied into the grid is very important. And we know how renewables plus storage can create grid stability because of the low cost of, renewables have no fuel source costs. The energy source is free. It's the equipment that you once purchased. We know the price of that energy over 20, 30 years is very stable. So it doesn't change. Where we see natural gas prices are volatile and we see weather changes and all sorts of things that change those pricing. Renewable energy pricing is very stable, and that brings stability to the market as price wise, while other energy sources are volatile. But it also gives a lot of stability to the grid, and particularly when we start mixing that with storage. And we see even in places in Arizona where they are going completely to renewables plus storage to maintain and power their grids. And that is and also smart grid technologies are another opportunity here that we haven't even touched on. So
my question, Sharon, is so if we eliminate our coal-fired power plants and our older gas plants, and solar's fine and the sun's shining, the wind's blowing, wind's working, and we get hit with a storm and we no longer able to get on-demand electricity from gas or coal, where are we going to go when we've eliminated all of our power plants in our state? Where's the electricity going to come from?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
When you no longer can come up with reliable electricity through solar and wind, you have to have a reliable base load, which is going to be coal or gas. So you're going to depend on another state to import your electricity in to make the difference up. Am I correct?
Well, I think you're looking forward to a place where you're saying there's 100% renewables, and actually, and that will come, and it is, and it is. There are modeling, and I don't know if we have time to get into the whole thing about how that creates a stable grid, reliable grid, in doing that. But I mean, right now, and in the next 10 years, we are going to need this very diverse energy mix. There's just no doubt about that. So, we will be having that solar and wind. If your house, if the electricity goes down, even if you have solar in your house that's tied into the grid, you can't turn your lights on right now. So if you're off grid, but that's not actually what we want to see either. We don't want to see a grid that is completely where people are completely independent, but we do see things like microgrids where the power goes down, that they're isolated and be able to island off so that we can see there's renewable energy sources working on with storage, and they island off when the rest of the grid goes down so they can maintain emergency responses and things like that. That is also another huge sector that's growing around microgrids to be able to do that too.
So now Germany is running a pipeline from Russia to get natural gas, and they have started their coal. They're just built a brand new coal-fired power plant, Dalen 4. If they were so far ahead of us in green energy, why are they going that route now?
I don't know, Molly, are you?
I think what he's asking is, other countries that do have a lot of solar, as you mentioned, even though China still is building more coal power plants, they still, rely on solar, or they still use solar. Germany, one of the leaders in solar, France as well, but they still supplement that solar with other sources of energy. I think he's asking, why do you think that they're continuing to supplement?
Yeah, I think that's right. Exactly what I keep saying is we need this diverse energy grid for a while. And I think let's just go back to RGGI. RGGI is the modeling for RGGI shows with or without RGGI that natural gas will be 70% of our electricity grid by 2030. Renewables are not your threat. Natural gas is. That's where coal jobs have been lost. And that's what they will continue to be lost faster than renewables can get there. Renewables aren't getting to 70% of our grid in 10 years. I can guarantee you that, but natural gas is.
I do want to switch over to, we have a lot of questions coming in from the webinar portion. I do want to acknowledge the comments that are being left on the Facebook live stream. So one of our first comments is, would solar be an opportunity to for farmers to diversify their income streams? And if it's Sharon.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's one of the things that we are seeing. As I mentioned, the landmen that were doing fracking land leases are all across Pennsylvania, looking and talking to farmers, because farmers, we've lost over 6,000 farms in the last 7 years. I think there's even more now at post-COVID. So farming a portion of their land, I'll just say prime land, farmland is not going to go under solar. It's protected under farmland preservation. But a lot of farmers do have land that is available for and suitable for solar. They can lease those properties at $1,000 per acre per year for guaranteed over 20 years. And that gives a steady income to those farmers while they continue maintaining farming and other portions. And then we have agrivoltaics, which combine solar and farming. So we're seeing a lot of these solar projects now incorporating grazing, like sheep. We see that Susquehanna University is doing that with the family, the Owens family sheep farm, and pollinator-friendly plants that support the pollination of crops on other parts of the land, and also shade-grown crops that are grown among the solar. So it is a win-win. We see farmers supporting this, and really important to agricultural communities for sure.
I've heard that sheep are much better to keep on solar land than goats.
Do not want goats.
Yes. So answering another comment on our Facebook live stream, and then switching back to webinars. Are solar and wind economical options without federal and state subsidies? Nuclear has proven to be and seems to be the true intent of RGGI, is the comment. And as long as everyone is polite and civil with their comments, I will read them as they come in.
Well, the subsidy question is always a really one that I just want to roll my eyes at, because Penn Future just came out from another study with the millions of dollars of subsidies that go into the fossil fuel industry and nuclear industry. I'll just start, our history has been every large power plant in Pennsylvania before 1998, I believe it was paid by ratepayers that paid to build all of the infrastructure. That's since changed. That's no longer the case. So any new power generation in Pennsylvania is built with private money, and then the power is sold because it's separated out now from the utilities. So those older power plants have all been subsidized, including every nuclear power plant, every coal-fired plant in the past. There are also a number of so many different tax subsidies that every energy source is highly subsidized, and has been for many, many years. So I'm just going to stop there. So yes, and renewable energy, in addition, does need in addition to other resources too. So.
Okay, Rachel, it looks like you wanted to share something there.
Yeah, I kind of have to roll my eyes and laugh at the whole Penn Future study. I mean, I'm looking at some of the things that they claim are subsidies that are just a complete joke in what they do in their accounting. One of them is because we don't put a sales tax on electricity use on homeowners and businesses. So that's part of their subsidy calculation, that we don't put a sales tax on the folks for their electricity use. Part of the other subsidies is a 6% sales tax on homeowners that use heat with fuel oil. So essentially their entire argument for subsidizing the fossil fuel industry is that we don't tax homeowners for their fuel and heat oil. I'm reading it right now. So their report is just, I mean, it's making up numbers. Outside of that, I did want to go off on something that Sharon had said about the governor's fund or plan for workforce training and impacted communities. I saw a draft. I don't know if it's draft or if it's really out there in circulation, but a white paper on what he actually plans to do with that fund. First of all, he can't do the fund without General Assembly approval. So part of the problem here is he's trying to unilaterally join RGGI without General Assembly approval, and then wants to go to the General Assembly and say, can you clean up my mess in all these communities and counties like Indiana that he's going to completely destroy? So he cannot do the fund without legislative approval. Beyond that, he had promised, I think it was like half of the revenues from RGGI to go towards these impacted communities and workforce development. Well, first of all, the numbers that they're projecting that RGGI will create for Pennsylvania are way over projected because their data doesn't match. They inflate generation in Pennsylvania in future out years so that they can inflate the number of CO2 reductions or anticipated CO2 tax payments on our generation. So outside of the revenues not even coming in on where they are projected. Now, mind you, this is all based on faulty modeling from different RGGI auctions that is completely out of date at this point. So their entire modeling is not even relevant. But that aside, they want to give 50% of the revenues, which would be about $150 million to workforce development and impacted communities. But then if you look at the fine print, those impacted communities include environmental justice communities with high minority populations. So they don't even say how they're going to split the money in that fund. So it could be 45% of the communities impacted could go to environmental justice communities in Philadelphia, and 5% could go to Indiana County when there's not that same kind of population basis. So the fund itself is completely disingenuous for helping any communities or workers that are impacted or have to transition by the impacts of RGGI. Beyond that, like I mentioned, a diverse grid is good for everybody. I think, having solar, having wind, having natural gas, having coal, and having nuclear is all very important, as is hydro as well. But at the end of the day, coal is the only fuel source that is reliable and resilient. Nuclear is also reliable and resilient, but it cannot ramp up when you need it to ramp up. And natural gas has its own issues with compressor stations and not having on-site fuel source. So while wind and solar, I agree, will be increased on our grid and there will be a build out of more wind and solar, it's just not reliable. It can't be a large component of the grid unless there is an extreme amount of battery buildup. And right now, the batteries that are needed and the mining that has to exist in China to build these batteries just don't exist. Right now, the batteries might support, 2 hours, 3 hours on the grid, but not for a massive amount of time that, like we just saw in Texas. Now, Texas is its own problem because, not to relate it to a microgrid, but it was an island that was not connected to anybody else. So they couldn't get power from other places and every single source failed. I mean, across the board, Texas was a mess. So we can't really compare that, and we can't really compare it because PJM doesn't operate the same way, and we don't have, thousands of acres of wind in West Texas that's transmitted, loses efficiency and power all the way across the state to West Texas where the population is. PJM's grid is much more diverse in the fuel sources and where the transmission lines are placed, but that comes to another issue with wind and solar. It has to be connected to the grid somewhere, and Pennsylvania doesn't have, we have some areas that are very mountainous and some areas in Somerset County that have installed windmills, and some areas up, I think what is that, I-81 that goes north past Hazleton that has a good amount of windmills installed there too, but they have to have access to transmission lines. So without that access to transmission lines, you can't really just site it anywhere. And then you get into the siting issues, which are not in my backyard. I mean, it's great for folks that want to install wind and solar, but then you have folks in New Jersey that have $1 million beach homes that don't want to look at a windmill in the ocean. So these are all issues that just have to be considered and thought about very properly and thoroughly without just running out of the gate with let's shut down Pennsylvania's coal-fired generation, older natural gas-fired generation, replace it with West Virginia's generation, and really accomplish nothing other than destroy our economy.
Thank you, Rachel. I think this kind of goes with a question that was just asked about 10 minutes ago by Thaddeus. If you could share that study that you and Sharon were talking about, I forget which one it was called.
Penn Future
yes,
subsidy study.
If you have a link available to that, if you could drop that in the chat for everyone to see, I can comment that on the Facebook page. So that way, people have access to it. That would be very, very helpful. But perhaps you could talk about the PA Game Commission has voted, I think, unanimously to support RGGI. The same body voted, I think, unanimously to prohibit the use of PA Game Commission lands for installations of solar or wind facility installation. If such facilities should not be installed on public lands, what criteria will be proposed to allow their installation on private lands? Is it okay to kill bats and birds on private land, but unacceptable to see the same occur on public holdings?
I'm sorry, Mara, I'm not familiar
Oh.
with it. So the Game Commission is not allowing solar on their lands? Sorry, is that?
Yes, it seems that's the question. I suppose since you aren't from the Game Commission yourself, so you can't necessarily speak to their legislation. Perhaps do you know anything about the protections for environmental protections that go with solar or more specifically wind?
You mean for citing those
Yes,
sources?
yes,
Well,
yes.
yeah, and first I'll just say there are a number of state agencies that are DCNR, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, is doing a lot of solar build out right now on their facilities and state parks and other facilities. And then the governor just announced his plan to power 50% of state electricity with solar project, with a 191 megawatt project just last week. So there's that. As far as siting, of course, with any kind of development, there are environmental reviews, but they're very, particularly in solar and wind, but we're going to see more solar build out than we are wind. In Pennsylvania, the wind we're seeing is more attracted now to offshore and in the Midwest, but we will see some more wind. There are very few environmental impacts of solar, so those reviews are actually fairly straightforward and easy. But just like other developments, there's land subsidence reviews and geotechnical studies on those larger projects that have to be done. I just want to make a point on the infrastructure. I think Rachel mentioned about transmission lines and things like that. Pennsylvania is our grid is one of the most built out grids, overbuilt actually, because of our industrial heritage, grids in the whole country. So we have plenty of transmission lines and distribution lines all across the state. There is some congestion, electrical congestion in the eastern part, but we don't really see that in the rest of the state so much, particularly here in Western Pennsylvania. So lots of room on our grid for adding new resources.
All right, thank you, Sharon. Our next question, I see Aric, you'd like to answer this one. Why can't a diverse energy mix reasonably include coal and gas-fired power plants? How much investment has been made to reduce emissions in Keystone, Homer City, and Conemaugh?
Okay, yeah, I'll speak to that. I can't say exact numbers, but just in scrubbers since 2000, there's been billions of dollars invested between Keystone, Conemaugh, and the Homer City plants to scrub out SO2, NOx, and inherently lower the mercury emissions. And as far as the CO2 on the statewide, we've surpassed all goals just mainly through the production of gas, and gas has come up. So we're ahead of Obama's 2030 CO2 goals currently. So it's just a matter of keep moving the goalpost to run us out of business. I mean, these plants run clean. I work in them every day, so I understand that. One thing I wanted to touch upon with the solar and whatnot is nobody's speaking of the voltage regulation that these baseload plants provide, and the renewables simply are not built out to do that. They cannot react to the load fluctuations on the grid. You have to have a big horsepower generator behind it to react to that. So, going down this road, and like I said, I worked there during this cold snap in February, and we ran against our top end the whole time because we had to, because these renewables, which are the game of the future, but the future's nowhere near, as far as I can see, dropped out of the game, and we had to pick up the pace. So it's a good thought that we could have renewables, but we keep saying that it could be this and it could be that. We're nowhere near there. We don't have storage, and the only true reactive resiliency is the coal, because even the gas during the cold snaps, the gas plants lose their supply to residents. So they actually back off. So the only ones that are reacting are the coal plants. The nuke plants run steady 24/7. The coal plants are the ones that are ramping up, and that's why I said earlier in my conversation that what we're heading towards is just more imports from other states that aren't taxing their coal plants out of business, because the renewables simply cannot supply it. It's proven over and over again.
All right, thank you, Aric. Moving on to a different but related question. Global warming is real and happening. How do coal supporters think we should go about reducing CO2 emissions? So I suppose this could be any one of the three of you.
I'll answer that also. Okay, maybe I don't have the answer for reducing it, but by PA going into Reggie at this point, like I said earlier, we will be running plants with higher heat rates in Ohio in order to support this grid. And what that higher heat rate does, it requires more BTUs for them to produce electricity. So if the plants in PA are not running, which are now because they are more efficient, we are actually going to be bringing online less efficient plants outside of PA. So on one hand, I'm not giving you an answer how we should do it, but we're going in the wrong direction at this point.
Yeah, Molly, go ahead, Shawn.
I would just like to add to that. We also have, we're not even speaking of, we have carbon capture and sequestration, and Pennsylvania has the right formation to sequester CO2, and it will eliminate 90% of our CO2 emissions. It's a proven technology. It's being used in Japan and China with their coal. And we can use it by getting byproducts off the liquefied CO2 and fertilizer. We can make carbon nanotubing. There's a lot of derivatives from it, and that's another option. And that's one of the things, if we eliminate our coal-fired power plants here in Indiana and throughout Pennsylvania, we will not be able to implement any of these carbon capture, anything with technology driven. It's going to be out of state, and we're going to lose great future and more jobs in the energy industry that are well-paying, blue-collar, family-sustaining jobs. And that's a fact that we have not really touched upon on what the people that work in the energy industry make. And they're at the pinnacle of blue-collar jobs, and we're ready to eliminate them.
We are coming up short on time, so there are two more questions that I'll look at.
Molly, if I could just briefly add to that, and I will very quickly, to talk about what Aric said, he's very correct. And a lot of the Pennsylvania coal that goes to Pennsylvania power plants is of a higher quality and henceforth is lower in emissions than some of the Central App coal that goes to West Virginia and Ohio. And to be quick, we do need to continue to invest in carbon capture, sequestration, utilization. Shawn is correct that USGS has looked at US Geological Survey has looked at some areas in southwestern Pennsylvania on the geologies that we have to store CO2. And in addition to that, and just one quick plug, one of Pennsylvania's largest coal operators, it has embarked with they're in their second phase of their final FEED study, which is front-end engineering design, to design a 300 megawatt coal slurry power plant that's 97% CCUS and carbon negative with the use of biofuels. So, it's 300 megawatts, is a lot smaller, but part of the study also reflects on the fact that PJM West, which is the western side of PJM, the PJM states, Pennsylvania, West, Ohio, does not have a lot of sun and a lot of opportunities for renewables. So there is a demand for reliable baseload energy in that side of PJM. This is not sponsored, but there was investments from Department of Energy and Nettle, which is located just north, the Pittsburgh lab, just north of Allegheny, or just north of Pittsburgh and near the airport, and is an ongoing project. So those investments and in continuing to use the natural resources that we have and continuing to invest in the things that we need to do to make sure that we have reliability on our grid.
Excellent, thank you. So, I know Sharon, you have to go.
I'm
I'd really
sorry.
like to, I'd really like to quickly just end on the note of, since we focused on Reggie, as we send everybody off, I'd like to go around and ask everyone, what is one thing that if Reggie were to be put forward, what is one part of the legislation that you would like addressed or changed? What is one recommendation you would like to give somebody who is putting together Reggie if it must go forward? And we'll start with Sharon.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I do have to drop off
Yes.
for another talk that I have to do. But I think that I'll just quickly add on the jobs piece. As I mentioned, gas is displacing coal jobs. And so those last jobs aren't getting paid anything. And we do want to make sure that we are diversifying. Reggie does actually have a fund for energy communities transition and a separate fund for environmental justice fund plan. So I just want to point that out, that that's really important. Those are two different in their proposals. If you read it, they are in there. And renewables work really well. There are Massachusetts, New York, all the northeastern states, and Ontario and Canada have so much more solar than it works very well here. It works just as well as Arizona on your house. If you add two more panels on your house, you'll be producing the same amount of energy. So I'll jump off, but thank you so much for the great discussion.
Thank you so much for your time, Sharon. We appreciate you. So moving on, Rachel, before you head out, what is one thing, if Reggie had to go forward, what is one crucial piece of legislation that you think needs to be amended or added to?
Well, I think what I will say, which is very important, and maybe where Sharon's a little confused, is that it's not legislation. It's that the governor is trying to do it through regulation and avoid legislation. So the legislation that he would need to have any kind of fund to assist communities would have to go through the General Assembly, but he's going around the General Assembly to accomplish it. That said, one thing that I would recommend, I've been very disappointed in this process, and I think it's incredibly disingenuous and of the governor and the Secretary of DEP, who's repeatedly said, well, these coal plants are gonna die anyway. They're gonna go away anyway. So why are we implementing Reggie and making them go away in 2022? January 2022 is the plan. So we're in the end of March. So in 9 months, these coal plants will likely shutter their doors. But the excuse is they're going to go away anyway. And I just think, if that's really, truly your thinking, that they're going to go away anyway, let the market forces, determine that. Let them gradually, phase out their existence. Some of them are very old, but they did invest billions of dollars during the past decade to comply with environmental regulations. And again, it's just moving the benchmark, moving the fence post, making you have to do more and more and more just to stay open. So I would say if there was going to be one thing that if the Reggie regulation were to go forward, would be a plan, an actual plan for these communities, an actual plan for the phase out of these coal plants. Outside of that, I don't think that he has the legal authority to even do this by regulation, and it will likely come down to litigation at the end of the day. But involving the General Assembly and involving your state representative and your state senator, I started out by saying that Senator Pittman and Senator Struzzi have been excellent during this fight against the governor trying to join Reggie unilaterally. But we need more. We need activity on Facebook, on social media, on Twitter. Write letters to the editor, and not just to the Indiana Gazette. Get them to the Post Gazette. Get them to other papers in the state. Talk to your neighbors, and more importantly, vote, because the folks in office right now are the folks that are trying to force Pennsylvania into this.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Those are all excellent points. Shawn, would you like to share, if you had it your way, if you were putting pen to paper on Reggie, what's the crucial change that you would make to the legislation?
Well, I think that, anybody in the PJM, West Virginia, Ohio, we should not join Reggie unless the other exporters of electricity join Reggie also. I think one big point that we failed to discuss today, and especially Indiana County, how many acres and how many trees would need to be cut down if we were to implement solar in our community or our county or in the state of Pennsylvania to take the place of coal. And that is something that really needs to be looked at, because we're going to be cutting millions of trees down and taking thousands of acres so we can put solar panels and windmills up. And nobody wants that. And I live in rural Pennsylvania and I'm in the woods all the time. And that's not what wildlife wants to see, or anybody that loves the great outdoors. And, you know, that's something that we had a problem in Indiana. We couldn't even cut trees down in White's Woods, but yet we're willing to cut all these trees down to implement solar. And solar and wind also has environmental baggage. It comes with it. And it's just not clean and green like everybody makes it out to be. These are built with energy intensive industries, and they're being built with coal fired generation in China. If we could do it with solar, that's what they'd be doing over there. Thank you.
Molly, if I could add to that, just tongue in cheek too, with the required felling of so many trees that we required, I find it incredibly ironic considering trees through photosynthesis actually pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. So it's almost, it just does not make sense.
Okay, thank you. And Aric, you know, you started us off with what is one thing that you would like amended or added to the Reggie legislation if Reggie were to go through?
Shawn actually hit the nail right on the head. You know, if it's environmental impact you're looking for, this needs to be a pact inside a PJM. So if everyone's involved, you're getting the most efficient generation being used, and you're actually making an impact. I think we've beat the dead horse several times on this today in saying that, you know, it does no good to move the generation from PA to another state, especially in the fact of where you're going to be running generators that actually emit more into the air. It just makes no sense. You know, they need to all be involved, and then the resiliency end of it actually needs to be legitimately looked at, because a saying that we have at the plants is that, you know, the worst thing that ever happens is nothing happens. And what that means is when these cold snaps come, you know, we all work together, the trades and the plants, and nobody in Pennsylvania had to deal with what happened in Texas. And that's because we're there. So there's no reality check out there for people to see. But all you have to do is look at the history on PJM's generation mix and see what happens during them cold snaps. And the demand goes up, and everybody else walks away except nuclear. Nuclear stays flat normally. Everyone else walks away while coal generation steps up and takes on the demand, and literally is saving lives. Because, you know, we go dark in these cities in the middle of February when it's 5 degrees, there's going to be a lot of people dying. It's going to be a lot more ugly than Texas was. So, but the biggest thing is it just makes no sense to target Pennsylvania when you're going to have emissions from other states go up.
Okay, all right, thank you. And just to summarize everyone's point, you know, I think Sharon really focused on the protection of the workforce. Rachel, you touched on the importance of making sure that, you know, legislators are actually being included in this process. And, you know, Shawn and Aric, I think you touched on how this needs to cover not just coal as an energy producer, but, you know, it needs to be applied more equally, if I'm phrasing that correctly as a summary. There is a conversation going on Facebook. You know, I'm sorry that we do have to leave some questions neglected, but, you know, as speakers, you're more than welcome to get on our Facebook and address some of those questions, or send them to me as emails and I can post them on our Facebook. We really appreciate your guys' time today. You know, we know it's, we're a very small community. We appreciate it whenever people take time for us. Anyone who is interested in these discussions about policy, we do have a live stream from one of our earlier webinars on our Facebook called Energy Policy Impacts on, I think it's Pennsylvania Residents is the name. It will be posted on our website as well. This recording will also be posted on our website, so you can go back and view it later on. It'll take a while for it to get on the website, but it will be on our Facebook live stream. Thank you everyone so much for your time, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.